Welcome back to NewsX. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. In today's episode, we will discuss Australia's role on the global stage, from banning social media for children to curtailing the rise of anti-Semitism in the country, from China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region to the increasing need for world leaders to negotiate peace in the two global wars. How is Australia going to navigate through these challenging times? Let's find out. Joining us is Nicola Smith, the federal politics editor at The Nightly, an Australian news outlet. She covers Australian politics with a particular focus on the Indo-Pacific region. Smith spent 8 years in East Asia, contributing to publications such as The Telegraph and The Sunday Times. She has reported extensively on various political issues central to Australia. Thank you, Nicola Smith, for joining us. My first question to you is, a video of an Australian national captured by Russia while he was fighting in Ukraine has surfaced. Is it surprising that an Australian national was caught fighting in a war in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly what Oscar Jenkins was doing near the front lines in Ukraine, but this video emerged on Russian social media channels at the weekend, and it certainly came as a shock to his friends. He was seen being brutally interrogated by Russian captors. And what we do know is that he's believed to be the first Australian to be captured by Russians. It's no particular surprise that there are Australians in Ukraine. There are many different nationalities who have gone to Ukraine, whether as fighters or as volunteers in a humanitarian capacity, who have signed up to help Ukraine defend its territory or defend itself against Russia. And we know that at least 7 Australians since the start of the war have died in Ukraine. Um, there are many nationalities who have gone to Ukraine despite warnings from their own governments. And this case has certainly presented a headache for the Australian government, who have now urged Russia to comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law, including with respect to prisoners of war and protecting them from violence. On Monday, we saw the Russian ambassador being summoned to the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Canberra, and they are trying to establish the conditions of Mr. Jenkins and where he is exactly. Russia's foreign ministry has also said that they are looking into this matter. And it raises fears of a hostage diplomacy situation, or that Mr. Jenkins could be used for Russian state propaganda purposes. It also raises the question of a prisoner exchange and whether Australia might try to push for that. There is an Australian pro-Kremlin propagandist called Simeon Boykov, also known as the Aussie Cossack, who has been holed up in the Russian consulate in Sydney for the past 2 years. He's trying to avoid an arrest warrant for allegedly assaulting a 76-year-old man during a pro-Ukraine rally, and he has volunteered himself for an exchange. But we don't know if the Australian government would go for that option. They're still trying to establish at the moment what has happened exactly to Mr. Jenkins.
Do you think Trump can negotiate a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia?
We don't know exactly yet what President Trump will do. When it comes to Russia and Ukraine, he has promised already that he wants to negotiate a deal that would be good for both sides. He's certainly promised a very different approach to the Biden administration, which has stuck to really unflinching support of Ukraine over the past couple of years. Mr. Trump is more focused on bringing the two sides to the negotiating table and ending the war. And the Ukrainians may be more willing now to look at doing this. They've been losing ground, they've been struggling with manpower. Russia has already paid a very heavy toll. It may wish to consolidate its gains. If President Trump goes for this option, he needs to do more than just end the fighting. He also needs to find a solution to make peace last. That would require assurances to Ukraine about its longer term security. And we do know that President Trump has already appointed Keith Kellogg, who's a former national security advisor to former Vice President Pence, as a peace envoy. Uh, Mr. Kellogg believes that a resolution to the war may appear within months of President Trump's inauguration. He has already co-authored a peace plan that would freeze the front line in Ukraine and also take NATO accession off the table for an extended period. It would partially lift sanctions on Russia. And under this proposal, the United States would continue to send military aid to Ukraine and provide security guarantees to Kyiv to prevent further Russian aggression. The plan doesn't require Ukraine to reduce the size of its army or recognize occupied territories as Russian, but military aid would cease if Ukraine refused to hold peace talks with Russia.
Is there an end in sight to the Gaza conflict?
It's a very difficult question. On Christmas Eve, it was reported that the gaps between Israel and Hamas have narrowed around, although crucial differences do still remain. There has been a fresh bid by mediators, Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, to end the fighting and to release hostages. And this has gained momentum, although there's been no breakthrough as yet. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has refused to put a timeline on it, although he has said that progress has been made. In the Knesset earlier this week, he said that great achievements had been made on the military front and that pressure on Hamas had led its leaders to soften previous demands. On the Palestinian side, the identification of some Palestinian prisoners to be released by Israel in return for the hostages who are still in Gaza has yet to be agreed. On the Palestinian side, the identification of some Palestinian prisoners to be released by Israel in return for hostages has yet to be agreed, along with precise details about the deployment of Israel's troops. But it certainly seems to be in a better position than before. And Israel's diaspora minister has said that both sides are far closer to reaching an agreement than they have been for months. He said that a ceasefire can last 6 months or 10 years. It depends on the dynamics that will form on the ground. And this hinges on the powers running the rehabilitation of Gaza once the fighting stops.
How can Israel be persuaded to ensure a permanent ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, a major sticking point through the failed peace talks has been that Hamas wants an end to the war, and Israel wants an end to Hamas rule in Gaza first. And it's very difficult for other countries to persuade Israel to do something that it believes to be contrary to its own security. Even though a large majority of UN members have called for a ceasefire over the past year. On Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signaled an agreement about the war in Gaza could be nearing. He said, I wish to say cautiously that there has been some progress and that we will not stop acting until we bring them all home, referring to the hostages, the Israeli hostages who remain in Gaza, of which we believe there are about 96, and 34 bodies of those who have died. He told the Knesset that the administration was taking serious action to bring the captives back. Hamas says that a deal is possible if Israel stops imposing new conditions.
Are there rising cases of anti-Semitism in Australia? Why?
According to data by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, yes, there have there has been a rise in cases of anti-Semitism in Australia. This includes acts of physical assault, vandalism, verbal abuse, incidents of anti-Jewish messages, graffiti, posters. These kind of incidents rose from 495 in 2023 to 2,062 in 2024. In mid-December, the whole country was shocked by an arson attack on a synagogue in Melbourne. This was followed a few days later by anti-Semitic graffiti and the torching of a car in a suburb of Sydney that is known to have a number of Jewish residents. And Jewish Australians have said that they are afraid of what might happen. So these reports of anti-Semitism, rising anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism has been on the rise since the October 7th attacks and Israel's war in Gaza. Some leaders of the Australian Jewish community have criticised the government and law enforcement agencies for not being tough enough on such incidents since the beginning. The government, on its part, has said that it has taken concrete actions to counter the problem. This includes legislation to make it illegal to use Nazi symbols, salutes, and salutes. It says it's also passed laws against doxing and fresh terror laws, and that there are upcoming laws on criminal offences for hate speech and vilification. What many in the Jewish community are saying that they want to see a tighter enforcement of existing laws. The government has condemned anti-Semitism in the strongest of terms. After the December attacks, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese pledged 8.5 million Australian dollars to upgrade Sydney's Jewish Museum, which teaches visitors about the Holocaust. And he called for unity to consign the evil of anti-Semitism to the past. And it's fair to say that Australia has been very shaken by what has happened in the past month, particularly.
Do you think the Australian government's ban on children under the age of 16 using social media platforms will be effective?
We won't really know until 2026 when the ban comes into place how effective it's going to be. The government has passed world-leading legislation that would enforce or would bring into force a ban on under 16s from using social media. No other country in the world has done this on this scale, but they still have to work out the details of how exactly it's going to work and how you can keep children off the internet. So trials are underway, will be underway in 2025, just looking at different models and different types of technology that would determine age. So age verification, age estimation, looking at age inference. So these are signals that go beyond just providing your date of birth that would indicate what kind of age you are, looking at your face, how your face ages, different features, your hands, your voice. At the moment, there's a company that's trying to get the right mix of this kind of technology that would work for Australia. And this legislation has a lot of support among parents, in particular, who are worried about their children's mental health. But there is also a lot of opposition to this ban from human rights groups, from children's advocacy groups, who do say that online communities are very important for a lot of children and that this would cut them off from their peer groups. There's also a question of whether children should be taught how to better navigate through social media, which is an important life skill, rather than simply banning them from it. So there are still a lot of questions that need to be answered on this social media ban.
Does Beijing pose a threat to Australia in the wake of its new bilateral deals with the Solomon Islands?
Beijing doesn't pose any kind of imminent threat to Australia. In 2022, there was some alarm around a security pact that was signed between Honiara, the capital of the Solomon Islands and Beijing. It was very secretive. It raised fears that Beijing might be trying to establish a future military presence on the Solomon Islands, which would be essentially in Australia's backyard. So there was concern about that. Both China and the Solomon Islands have denied that this is the case. But since then, Australia and the United States have really stepped up their engagement in this very strategic region. Last week, towards just before Christmas, Canberra announced a 190 million gift to the Solomon Islands to boost its police forces. This was the fourth major cooperation deal with a Pacific Island nation that Australia has made this year, as Canberra tries to promote itself as a security partner of choice in this very strategic region, as the United States or the competition between the United States and China increases. And these earlier pacts that Australia made with Papua New Guinea, Nauru, and Tuvalu, they lock these countries into security guarantees to prevent them from looking to other third countries for security. That isn't the case in the Solomons deal, but it is being viewed as another effort for Australia to boost its presence in the Pacific, and particularly with these Pacific Island neighbours.
Do you think Quad can fight against the growing Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, nobody is fighting just now. What the Quad does is it provides a strong signal of deterrence against China's military ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. We are seeing increasing coordination between democratic nations, including the Quad, which is comprised of Australia, the United States, India, and Japan. There are various alliances and partnerships that are forming between democratic nations, which do aim to deter any aggressive behavior by China, particularly in the South China Sea or against Taiwan, and just to really counter China's expanding footprint across the Indo-Pacific. There are also calls for the need for more coordinated economic behavior, not just on the military front, as well as more economic support for the Indo-Pacific. And the first Trump administration was a supporter of the Quad. We'll need to wait and see if the incoming Trump administration is as committed to strategic competition with China in the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you, Nicola Smith, for joining us on Focal Length. For more international news, stay tuned on NewsX.